I want to start off with a little quote, which I think is from Mary Oliver, which I love. And I think it's really important that we should never forget. And that is, what is it that you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? You know, we have an opportunity on our planet to do many things. And it's really it's up to us to decide how and what we do. And very often I'm accused of sitting up in the mountains thinking about what to come as a futurist, and I wish I could. I wish that was my office. Even these days, it's not. But sometimes I think this is one of the most wonderful places to be. And then, of course, we know all of us have become all too familiar with this little icon. You know, none of us knew that this 60 or 90 nanometer virus was going to become the focus of so much of our lives. And for many of us, COVID-19 has been a wave, and we're seeing multiple waves now. Like for some, it was a wave which you could surf, and you could able to slide down its impact with impunity. For others, we experienced it like a tsunami, which just slowly overtook everything that we've done. And for others, it was quite fascinating. It seems to have had no impact at all. And the way they've just been able to continue with their lives. And it's quite baffling to me how they can do that. But what's interesting is that no matter where we have been, all of us are aware of COVID-19, or all of us are feeling this. And we're feeling very much how this frenetic pace of life has changed. We were able to go from hundreds of thousands of kilometers or miles per year, which I was flying, and the entire time just turned off, just like this wonderful old bakelite switch in the machine in Hollis. So then we all, at least for me, experienced a great emptiness. Our halls at the ETH became devoid of people, the trams, devoid of people, our beautiful public spaces, devoid of people. And even the airport lines, which at one point in my life, I would have jumped for joy to have seen an immigration line like this, was somehow quite sad. And our skies had an emptiness of these contrails. The very lone one, which is being in Zürich, right in the middle of Europe, we have our blue skies turn into white skies very quickly because of the clouds. But there's also been a very interesting great togetherness. This was the first picnic which I was able to attend. I was the single plate, and those are my colleagues. And yes, that's a meter stick. Only in Switzerland would you actually get out the meter to make sure you're exactly the right distance. But it was the most wonderful meal after being by myself for so long. And then all of us, as today, realized a new type of togetherness. We've become Zoomified and multiplied, and it's been this kind of bizarre experience of joining into a Nam June Paik video installation from the 1980s. I don't think he would have imagined that we would have been living this world, which we're in at this exact moment now. And so with all of this happening, a big question for us is, what will normal look like? Like, how do we define our normal to be? And this is where I spend and have spent for the past 20 years quite a lot of time thinking about what will our normal look like in all sorts of ways. Well, if we go back just not too long ago to look at all the graphs of what normal was becoming, all these graphs showing the socioeconomic trends up until recently were really quite good. You know, child education was increasing, childbirth was increasing. At the same time, all of the markers to show our Earth systems were also going up, but up was not good. Surface temperatures, ocean acidification, methane, the loss of biodiversity, all of these were going up as well. So we had these graphs which were beginning to help us understand what was happening in our world. It was interesting to me when I'm asked the question, Chris, what impact do you think this will have? I go back and I look at the airplane movement graphs up until the 2016, 2017, and even though they're all grounded and they want us all to feel sorry for them and give them lots of money, but we take a look at each of the big economic blips has occurred. There's been a blip, and somehow we've gone right back into that behavior. So humans are very good at forgetting things. And if we weren't able to forget, we would never fall in love twice. And it's a good thing we can forget. But maybe this time around, we don't want to forget. And so the big question for me when I'm thinking about that is, which curves are we going to see? You can say, well, it doesn't really matter which curve, because what ends up happening is is life. But when we're trying to imagine, when we're thinking out to the future, we have to think, which is going to return? What's going to return? What's going to never come back? Which ones are going to be bent? We're all trying to bend the curve. And here in Europe, we're all suffering a little bit from this return and the different actions which are being asked of us in order to take the social responsibility. So which ones will be bent? Not just the COVID curves, but really all sorts of ones. And which ones are going to continue to fall? We saw some CO2, we saw global trade. Are those going to continue to fall? Because that does all actually, whether we like it or not, have an implication on us, right? So an implication on our industry and what we do and how we do it. So what will the new normal look like? Well, to me, it's very complex and it's quite complicated. And most importantly for this group, the view of what impact it's had and will have is really dependent upon whether you sat or stood to work. I am part of the privileged, I would say, or many would say, and I don't know if that's really true, because I get to sit to work. Now, I have people who have to serve me when I go into a restaurant. The cooks, the servers, I get to sit. I sit in front of a computer. So I can do home office. But if you stand to work, if you're on a construction site, if you're mixing concrete, if you're cutting wood, if you're in the kitchen, if you're cleaning, you can't do home office. There's no such thing as home office. And so for me, when we think about normal, as complex and complicated, we've got to be very careful that we're remembering to consider all of society. And this is all too often forgotten, which is very important for me. So what has actually COVID done? Well, COVID-19 has been an accelerator of the inevitable. Failing business models have now failed faster. And the digital transformation is no longer maybe we'll do it one day, but it has been a must. And those who have not been able to do the digital transformation, at least to start a transformation, are either on their way out or out of business and will be soon out of business. Now, again, I place no value judgment on these. These are, to me, observations. It hurts me terribly when I look at in Germany, in Mittelbau, in Switzerland, as a country has built upon the small family business, has been the backbone, as in Germany, as in Denmark. Many countries in Europe have this small family business as the backbone. And so many of these businesses have not been able to transform, as many of their business models were not viable. The second thing is we have an appreciation, I believe, of moments that matter. We've discovered how important it is to have time to be together, but perhaps in a different way, right? We no longer crave the transactional meeting where Zoom has proven to be very effective, or other video conferencing, very effective to do transactional business. But the creative, I have yet to actually participate in a creative meeting, which has been really successful through the internet. There's Miro, there's all sorts of tools, which are not bad, but that creative being together, looking in someone's eye, watching the way they turn their neck or they kind of peer at something that inspires you has not yet be there. And also those moments of being together as a family, as friends, just a hug, just to actually, those moments which matter, I think is really important for us to kind of come again. And then the last one for me, for us, for our theme with digital building is increased awareness of global supply chains. There has been, as we saw, a crash course in the fragility of globalization. Globalization did many good things, one could argue, but has also resulted in certain fragility and a word called facility, which I'll come back to later. And also, for me, there's a slight dangerous move to the nationalistic supply resilience. And so we saw in Europe, and friends of mine and other strategy foresight say, what was the thing that surprised you most? And I said, well, the thing that surprised and shocked me was how quick our borders were reinstated here in Europe. That was a real shock to me, to see troops on the borders. And that was something which I never thought I would see again in my life, And what does this mean from a supply chain standpoint? Is this a good thing or a bad thing for our industry? Perhaps we become aware of what's available in ways which we never were before. It's no longer trying to save half a penny just by going to some other country in another part of the world, but actually say, well, actually, it's worth that half penny to have the supply from a neighbor rather than from far away. And so the question for us is of the stickiness. The things we're observing now, what will stick? What's going to stay? And what's going to rebound? That to me is really the big question, because eventually the virus will become all of our DNA. This will go through, probably take another year or so. And then, as I said, humans will start to forget. And then what will stay? And that to me is a really interesting question. So what will the new normal look like? Well, actually, it's going to look a lot like it did a year ago, right? All of a sudden, our cities are not going to disappear like in a video game. No, Chicago is not going to all of a sudden shrink and stop turning its lights on at night. San Francisco, the same. Golden Gate Bridge will still be there. Central Park will still be in New York. All the cities will be there. London is still going to be sort of the crazy, dense place it is, a mishmash of societies. Brisbane will still have ruined its riverfront views by building these super tall towers just to make money. Yeah, and we're going to still build, like in Barcelona, all over Spain, we're going to still be building over beautiful countryside, beautiful farmland. And we're going to still be wondering what to do with those old suburbs, which were miserable. And we're still going to be trying to figure out how to house the homeless, the millions at the base of the pyramid who are trying to achieve just a little bit of what we have. And I'm assuming that everyone on the call has a roof over their heads and has food, and probably most of us had coffee this morning. And we will still be extracting gold out of the ground, oil and gas. We'll still be trying to figure out how to feed ourselves by the myriads of fisheries here in the Yangtze River, or in the massive food farms in the middle of the United States. So these, I don't believe, are going to go away. So what will the new normal look like? Well, as I said, it's going to look a lot like it did last year, but it's going to have a digital twist. And to me, the most wonderful representation of the digital twist are these little columns by Professor Dillenberger here at the ETH, because they all have this great little digital twist. So I say a few things that I always believe when I look at the future. The first thing, that change is constant. We cannot stop change, right? And I think it's very important for us to think about that. And as students of life, I'll say, is part of our roles is to always be looking at that change. And we can make value judgments. We can have opinions, but it's important not to have blinders on and then to try to act. If I remember when I started, this was my tool, right? The good old drafting board. And this was a real desktop where you could put things out. You could see, people could come by. They could see your drawing. You would share your drawing. They would see things that you didn't see. They would be able to, you could ask questions. Today, if you go by someone's desktop and you peer over their shoulder, they look at you like, hey, you're invading my privacy. Get out of my face, right? It's a very different situation. We've won things, we've lost things. Or I think changes, kind of remember these got wonderful rapidiographs, ink on Mylar. How wonderful was that? Because you had to clean them. And I just discovered these not too long, like this past summer when I was cleaning out my garage in California. It was inevitable that when you had a drawing due, that your rapidograph's ink all gunked up, you ended up making a hole in the Mylar, which is plastic, and you had to use a razor blade to clean it off. And then you got to shove it through the blueprint machine, which has ammonia based. And my first job as a young man, and I don't know, when I was going to school, was running blueprints, and you're completely stoned by lunch from the ammonia. And it was not fun, but this was, So the second thing is everything inconvenient will change. So change is constant, but everything inconvenient will change. Now, you have to think about our professions and think about the points of inconvenience. The inconvenience of having to take and put these plans through an ammonia system, that's gone away. We don't do that anymore. But think about everything in that supply chain. And eventually that will change. That will go away. And this is where innovation comes in, where innovators look at points of inconvenience and they look, how can I change that? It might not be what they set out to do and say, hey, I'm an inconvenience hunter. But at the end of the day, this is what they do. And this is not just in our industry, but you think about ports. It used to be very convenient for ships to come into a port because the port lived on the life of a ship. But now everything's in containers, so nobody wants a port in the middle of their city anymore because it's no longer convenient to have these massive trucks rolling through your town. So it's very interesting with that, how that changes. Or the other thing that I have become really fascinated with this issue of digital building is this. It was through industrialization, inconvenient to have detail or complexity, because our mission was to make everything as uniform-ish as possible in order to be able to make good combinations. But now we have complexity for free, because when you're printing something like this, it doesn't matter if it's a straight line or a curvy line. From the machine standpoint, from the digital standpoint, it is exactly the same. So we get detail back, which I think is really quite amazing. And for example, with this, we call these little smart blocks, where a straight line and a curved line in a flatbed printer, the machine doesn't care. It's really quite fascinating. So it all becomes in your mind, what you're able to do, what you're able to design. And so you can combine structure and function in the way which we lost that capability in the Baroque we had. But it's like the Baroque is able to come back with no extra cost. Now, I'm personally, Baroque is okay for me to go and check out. And I'm kind of thinking, what's neo-Baroque? I don't know, I'm not sure. Aesthetically, I'm still kind of, but Benjamin loves these, and I think they're pretty amazing. But what I do find, this is where the structural engineer in me kind of gets excited. I love seeing this from Philippe Bloch, Professor Bloch, also at the ETH, where you're able to express the stress lines from in a flat slab in a way which we couldn't do before. So we're able to now come back to expression, the craft, able to return to what what we're doing in this terribly kitschy photograph. But you can see underneath my feet is air conditioning. So you can actually utilize the structure to combine functionality in a way which is, for me, so exciting. It does no longer has to be quite so simple and banal. Actually, the craft is back, which is really cool. And oops, got to find my forward button again. There you go. Lost mine. And through being able to craft to manipulate the form work, to route the form work, to digitally demand out of the form work, these new forms, are able to create new typologies of slabs, which are actually using our materials in a much more logical and efficient way. And that for me is also quite exciting. This is called the DFAB house in Dubendorf, which one can go visit and see these incredibly beautiful articulated concrete forms, the same as in cast aluminum. So we can now also get this complexity by building the cast works and then pouring the aluminum. So change is constant, everything inconvenient, it will change, and we are also in the era of augmentation. We're augmenting ourselves in our lives in so many ways. Just think of that little cell phone, which, this augments your intelligence, maybe, but your access to information in a way which is heretofore unimaginable. Or, as we see here, this fantastic example of being able to bring back, again, detail to our brickwork in a way with augmented glasses, being able to get that precise form back so we can create oscillations and create beautiful forms that we couldn't before. And this is one of my favorite recent buildings using literally digital craft. It's getting bricklayers, and bricklayers, crafts, we want to do excellent work. And here you're mixing this, and so augmenting the skill of this facade at a vineyard out in California. This is what looks sort of in German willkürlich, but it's very, very carefully thought about, to the point where during the construction, they have the cameras to help exactly lay each brick where it needs to be. So this idea of digital is not replacing the human, but actually helping us be able to create forms again, which we just, in some ways, weren't able to even think about before. And that, for me, gets super exciting. And this isn't just only for those who are highly skilled and experienced. Here's an example in a workshop of someone using these same glasses with just for the first time, which is cool, and being able to create some forms that we've designed ahead of time. So the other kind of augmentation, of course, of exoskeletons and being able to augment our physical strength, because our business is kind of dangerous. And so therefore, if we're able to augment our physical capabilities by lifting or being able to bend, here again, where you see the red and part of the left part of the images where these guys are trying to do pipe bending. And pipe bending is, kind of can't figure out exactly the right angle. Well, here with augmented glasses, you can get it right to the right exact point. Which is, for me, fantastic because, again, it's the utilization of the human and plus the machine. So change is constant. Everything inconvenient will change. We're in the era of augmentation. And, like it or not, anything that can be automated will be. And this has been, for many in our craft world, sort of the bane of our existence. But on the other hand, anything that can be automated will be, so we've got to get our heads around how we work with this. This is not new. This is not new at all. In the mining industry, they've had these massive trucks and mines, and you look and you look for the cab. There's no cab. This is been around for about 20 years. And I think about that, and then I think about this. When I think about automation, I'm not thinking about little delivery robots confronting us. I'm not thinking about kind of, for me, stupid automation. To me, I'm thinking about automation, which allows us to do things which we could never have done before, where we have, through automation, a hybrid with humans plus machine. This is the Sagrada Familia. And if you're not familiar with it, I encourage you looking at it. Of course, we all know the cathedral, but the goal is then here to complete it before its anniversary. And so at Arup was able to take a look at the process, and through extreme, like millimeter precision, micromillimeter precision, being able to pre-stress stone assemblies that can be lifted way up into the sky to be able to put in place, and they quite literally have to be like knocked into place with hammers. It's so, and so each of these are finished by hand. So you've got this beautiful combination of the stone mason and the mill, the high-end mill, or this beautiful barn in the UK. This is from a few years ago. But to me, I just absolutely love this. When I think about digital craft, this is it. And I go back to craft, thinking there was a time when every carpenter understood every tree, and we would plan what parts of a tree to harvest for parts of a ship or parts of a hall. And I just think this is so beautiful, this intimate relationship between humans and nature, and now this trilogy of humans, nature, and machine, where we're able to take and scan each one of these logs to understand their geometry, and then the algorithm can take and figure out what's the best combination of their geometries in order to make this truss. And then the milling machines is able to route the connections in order to make that happen. In the final assembly, we're able to put this up into, which is, to me, a very, very beautiful, beautiful hall that will then survive a test of time. So those four for me are quite important, and I always include them in every single one of my presentations, like it or not. But I think this is, in this case, for this one, really quite appropriate. And again, the wood chip barn is just so digital and craft. I was thinking about this and said, isn't it just a bit of a question of control? And who has control and who will have control? If we go back in time, those who controlled craft were the guilds. They not only controlled the knowledge, but they also controlled people. They were their own police force. They made sure that you behaved. But they also controlled your access, anybody's access, to not only your access to the skill you were trying to engage, but also access to the knowledge. So for me, when I'm thinking of where we are today, we have, to me, an incredible democratization of tools, right? And that is so exciting to think that it's no longer just those who are either indentured or have chosen to be in that, but then it's a democratization. So we can all have access to those tools to then think about how we do it. And there's a popularization of techniques. We're able to share that knowledge quite freely and openly, which this seminar and these workshops are about, is how do we popularize some of the techniques? So you've got the tools. Now, how do you use them? Let's amplify the positive by learning, not just in your tiny little guild, but globally, the best examples from the Japanese, from the Hungarians, from everybody. And finally, is ubiquity of data. And to me, the data has always been also a point of control, right? If you've got the data, then you have the power, because data can be ordered and create knowledge. And that, to me, now we've got the ubiquity of data that also allows us to share knowledge, which is the techniques and the tools. So it's a very exciting time. To me, this is actually, we're at the crux, right? And this is super, super exciting because there is now a systemic acceptance of the digital transformation. I truly believe this, a systemic acceptance. COVID has pushed us over the edge. Even countries who are extremely conservative in their practice are realizing that they really do need to move forward. And if I go back to think about Singapore, yeah, God, it was maybe 10, 15 years ago, started maybe even longer, accepting and demanding all buildings being submitted in 3D and then in BIM. So you don't produce anything in paper. It's like, why would you bother? Because the 3D model is so much more interesting. And all the work with Google, if you work with Google, one of the biggest developers in California right now, everything is done in 3D. All the walkthroughs are done with augmented and virtual reality. The question quite simply is, why would you not? Because you see things in 3D you couldn't see before, which means there's also this integration into practice. And that to me is a really, really, really important part, this integration into practice. Now, not every practice has integrated these tools and techniques or this data, but those who have and those who are those who are going to be the successful winners in this next economy. And I do believe this deeply. I'm not saying we throw away our pencils at all. I think sketching is an incredible skill, but now we have new tool sets and new skill sets we need to be incorporating into our teams. So, and that I'm absolutely convinced of, without a doubt. In 1968, I was a very young little boy. Bill Anders from Apollo said, we came all this way to explore the moon, and the most important thing is we discovered the Earth. We called it a little blue marble, looking back at that blue marble in the 60s. And to me, I think one of the things that digital and craft also gives us is the opportunity for us to rediscover our role in one of the most wasteful industries on the planet. And how can we rediscover not only the Earth, but our practice? And I think a big part of that has to be the planetary boundaries. The 9 systems with Earth scientists identified, which we as humans require on planet Earth to make sure that we are able not just to survive, but to thrive. And each one of those has a border in a traffic light system, which we should not exceed. And if we get through 3 or more of those, you and I are going to have problems. And I think this is something which is really crucial for us to take a look at, because this is a safe operating space for humanity. We only have one planet. We don't have a backup plan. And it's really crucial for us to understand that this is important. And each one of us as a private individual, as a person, and the decisions we make play a role in the planet and its boundaries. So if you haven't become familiar with Kate's book on donut economics or the philosophy behind it, I encourage you as a recovering academic, this is something you definitely need to take a look at. When we're looking forward, where you have the planetary boundaries on the outside of the donut and the SDGs on the inside of the donut. So you have the social foundation and the ecological ceiling. And our world is in between those two. And to me, this is really important, because when we look at the way in which we have a relationship between consumption and how we evaluate success, which is GDP, there seems to be a one-to-one relationship between these two. And our planet, we can't afford to continue to consume as we have up until now, because our consuming ways have resulted in some really terrible things. And not just the garbage, which we go and see all the time, but also there's a film which my friend Chris Jordan put together on the albatross, which you've never seen the film. Most of you probably haven't. I encourage you to go find the film. It's online, it's free. And I would make sure you're sitting down with friends or by yourself when you're watching it. It's not an easy film to watch. It's a beautiful film, but not easy. Because it's the circular economy. And all of us have probably heard about the circular economy. And I believe in it. The linear economy has gotten us to the point where we're at now. But I don't understand exactly how we fit. And I think we're still struggling with this, with the donut economic and circular economy. And I think it's our jobs, our role is to try to understand how we can contribute to this in a very important way. And I think that's really good. And a friend of mine said, he's a professor a retiring professor from Germany. He said his grandmother, he grew up in what Eastern Germany, he said a long time ago, he said, my grandma always told me we're too poor to buy cheap stuff. And she could never understand the consumer society. She says, why would you buy something when you know you're going to throw away a year later? He said she just could not get her head around that at all. And it's quite interesting to think about that. Why would you buy something which you know you're going to throw away a year later? Right, what does that say about you? What does it say about our values as a society? Yeah. So the next piece of homework, if you don't know Jared Diamond, is a book called Collapse. He's written a number of books. Most of them are quite interesting. Guns, Germs, and Steel is one of his favorite or famous ones. And Collapse is a great book. You read the beginning, the first chapter and the last chapter, and then everything else in between is sort of all the arguments. But the first and last are quite good. And I'm going to show you one diagram from it, which is what are the case studies of decline? What he observed why societies fail, why civilizations fail. And he showed 5 factors: environmental damage and population growth, climate change, hostile neighbors, weakened trade, and failure to solve societal problems. And I take a look at all those X's and I think, well, this is sort of interesting. And how are we doing with environmental damage and population growth? Climate change. Our hostile neighbors. I mean, if we're not in World War III in the next 5 years, it'll be a miracle, right? Weakened trade partners. And failure to solve societal problems. So I put an X in almost every one of those boxes, and I started to really get concerned and think, what is it that where can we be acting so that we create a more positive place for the next generations? And that's where I think about Metropolis. Of course, the wonderful Fritz Lang film of the upper world and the lower world. And I think about that description, early internet, but in the futures world, we think of the cone of the possible, the cone of tomorrow, the future. If we look at time moving to the right-hand side, there's this massive cone out there of all the possible futures. We say the probable one is like in the middle of that target, like a bow and arrow target, probably going to be that one. But each one of us can probably describe, or certainly describe, our preferable future. And that preferable future could be within the range of the possible, but it might slightly be out of it. And so then the question becomes, what can we be doing to move that cone, right? What are the actions we could be taking? And this is for us sort of philosophically as in life, but also societies. And so what does it mean? Because we should all have that probable and that preferable in the back of our minds. One thing that I truly, truly, truly do believe in are the Sustainable Development Goals. And I think this is very important that all of us look at those and understand not just the goals, but the 169 indicators behind each one of the goals. And to really think, am I helping? Am I playing a role? Because goal number 17 is partnerships. And partnering for the goals, partnering together is so critical with business, not as an enemy, but as a partner for success. And academia and civil society, this is all about partnerships. And this is, to me, also quite important. And digital can help that because we kind of have these little standing at a crossroads where, like this sign, we got some choices. We can keep going. We can go right. We can go left. I mean, it's just a matter of choice and the implications. And as someone once said, the best way to predict the future is to design it. Right? And I love that because, this is where we stand as a designer. Buckminster Fuller is the one who made that quote. And I think it's a wonderful thing. Now, the thing that I find, which is quite great, is it doesn't have to be complicated, right? Even though I did say earlier that the answer to that question of what our new normal will be is complex and complicated, at a daily life level, we can also think of very simple things like this little brush that's hung on the hook on the back of a bench, right? So this was just this past winter. And I was seeing this, thinking how brilliant, because if you want people to sit on that bench, you need to have a way for them to be able to get the snow off of it. And that little brush with the hook and the chain, just long enough to do the entire bench, had all sorts of implications about the society, about the expectations, and about the answers, I think, that we search. A while ago, I was in Chicago and came to a stoplight. And this is early in the morning, and you can see here's a concrete mixer, an American concrete mixer. Well, this is the Mies van der Rohe Tower, right? And it's a very beautiful building. And you can see his front left tire is flat. And it's not just flat, it's smoking. Now, I watched the driver kind of open the door, he peered down at his tires, shake his head, and he kind of closed the door. The light turned green. As you can see from his light turn signal, he then went left. He drove off on this flat tire. And I walked out into the middle of the street and watched the concrete mixer drive down the road. And I'm thinking to myself, this is really bonkers, right? And if you think about, if you're on the job site, the last thing you want is any concrete not to get there. If you own that concrete truck, the last thing you want is for that truck to stop. And without a big bag of sugar, you're going to end up having to throw away the entire drum. And if you're a policeman or you're the city utilities people, the last thing you want is that truck going anywhere. It's just going to rip up the road. So you have lots of very differing demands. And this is, to me, where I think about so much of what we do. Every one of our choices have consequences. And sometimes there's not really a right or wrong. They're just consequences. So the last few slides. Darwin said it's not the strongest of a species that survives, nor the most intelligent. It is the one who's most adaptable to change. These are buffalo skulls that were shot by the European settlers who came to North America, and they saw these big animals, and they kind of like shooting them. And their skulls were used for bone china. They almost went extinct because buffalo were just too dumb. They couldn't understand the signals of change, but we can, right? It's no longer 1870, it's 2020. And now knowledge is a commodity. We know about these potential of the digital world, the digital transformation. We know of the changes in climate. We know so much more than we knew in 1870. And what you do with this knowledge is now really what matters, right? I think this is, to me, so critical for all of us, is that we walk through life conscious of our movement, because we're at a true historical time in many, many, many ways. And I think this is really, really important for me. This is Winnie the Pooh or Edward Bear coming downstairs, bump, bump, bump on the back of his head behind Christopher Robin. It is, as far as he knows, the only way of coming downstairs, but sometimes he feels that there really is another way if he could just stop bumping for a moment and think of it. Well, to me, what partly I'm hoping that you've done is to stop bumping for a moment and just think about how we're walking through life. And Mary Oliver's quote, this is what will we do as our one wild and precious life. So with that, I would like to say thank you very, very, very much for the invitation to come and share some thoughts with you this morning. And be very happy to answer some questions if you have some. So, and I've also put here this the pieces of homework: planetary boundaries, donut economics, circular economy, SDGs, and albatross. Couldn't help myself.
Thank you very much, Chris, for this very inspiring lecture.